fans, welcome back to Room 237, and I have yet another silent film. Very, very interesting, different silent film from the 20s. 1922's Häxan, or Häxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages. This is a movie that was directed, and I believe written by Benjamin Christensen. It's a Swedish and Danish film that was actually completed in 1920, but not released until 1922. This is the Criterion Blu-ray, which I had the choice of getting the Criterion DVD or Blu-ray, and I thought the Blu-ray had more stuff on it. I've said before, I don't really care for Blu-ray or 4K as far as quality of picture. But when it comes to this film, holy hell does this movie look amazing. You could have not told me the year this came out. I never would have guessed it was the 20s. This movie is so crisp and clear. I'm assuming with this version. It looked absolutely gorgeous. And what makes this movie so different is it is scripted and there are actors, but it's done in the style of a documentary. Now, I've never seen a documentary done from the silent era, but Benjamin Christensen had done some very extensive research on, I believe it's a book, yeah, and if I pronounce it correctly, Malleus Maleficarum, which was a 15th century German guide for those during the Inquisition. And it chronicles the dawn of, first, what witchcraft is, the belief of witchcraft and hell and the devil, sort of where it began, where it came from, and then throughout the ages, especially during the Inquisition or the witch trials. Not so much the Salem witch trials. I mean, maybe. German guide, so. And then up to what we would eventually go to think about witchcraft and where it stands today, or up to this point. If anybody hasn't seen it, this is a very, if this were to come out today, I can see people calling it a very pretentious art house film. But I found it very, very interesting and beautifully shot. There are some things in it that I'm sure some people would say it's a victim of its time as far as effects go. But I think it helped it a lot. I mean, there are some things with models and lights on strings that looks like sort of like an Ed Wood set. But imagine Ed Wood done by James Cameron. Like, imagine Ed Wood making a movie the way he does, but on like a James Cameron scale. And it looks excellent. It looks magnificent. It is color tinted, which I always thought that meant there's some sort of coloration to it. But it's mostly in like that golden sepia kind of black and white. But there are some scenes where it's blue tinted or red. And just, I can't get over how magnificent this looks. If anybody's going to see this, I definitely recommend the Criterion Blu-ray. It does come with a little booklet, just sort of chronicling the film itself, its initial reception, what came of it since, the music. The music is great. I'm sure I'll get at least one comment saying, Wouldn't it be great if they just filled it with black metal? No. I could see scenes from this being put in black metal videos, but the classical music used for the film itself, I think, works perfectly. Especially the music on the main menu, which is also used, I believe, during the initial, when we get to the torture and interrogations during the Inquisition. So, it's broken up into 7 parts, and which actually the music in this version, because there's been a number of different versions of this. Music from the 1922 Danish premiere by Gillian B. Anderson, performed by the Czech Film Orchestra in 2001. So it's redone music, but it's all the original works. Audio commentary for the 2001 featuring film scholar Casper Tybjerg, Witchcraft Through the Ages, 1968, a 67-minute version of Häxan, narrated by beat author William S. Burroughs, which I'm a fan of his, with the soundtrack featuring violinist Jean-Luc Ponty, plus essays and photographic exploration. Definitely get the Criterion. Criterion's good for everything. I have another Criterion DVD, or I don't know if it's the DVD or the Blu-ray, coming of The Phantom Carriage, which is a 1921 silent film. And the only other one I have would be Sallow. Sorry, I'm sniffing. But anyway, so it's broken up into 7 chapters, and it does kind of break its own fourth wall in a way, more towards like part 6, where the director, through the intertitles, which it comes with the Swedish intertitles, which black screen, blue, Danish, or Swedish intertitles, they're Swedish. And then down underneath it's the white English subtitles. But the first part or so, also it was recreation of medieval scenes and the lengthy production period. It was the most expensive Scandinavian film ever made, costing nearly 2 million Swedish kroner. Don't really know what that translates to in American currency. It was banned in the U.S. for its graphic depictions of torture, nudity, and sexual perversion. Which, of course, everything in it seems tame by today's standards, even by 80s standards. But putting myself in 1922, there were some things that when I saw it, there were a couple scenes where I was like, wow, they put that in here? 1922? So the first several parts, the intertitles are told from the perspective of the director, who also portrays the character of Satan himself, which is a very interesting looking depiction of Satan. But the first part especially is mostly, I think, even from that 15th century guide itself, maybe even older stuff. Very old artwork with like a little wooden pointer to point out certain things, and then the intertitles explains it to us, like the circles of hell and what is believed to happen, like how the devil is here. There's all these different levels for different sins. The sinner is here. Demons will do this and that. It points everything out with the visual. And then the intertitles explains what we're looking at. There is a couple stop motion parts in that where it looks like the devil, more so in this style than when he's portrayed by Christensen, breaking through like a church door, I think it was. We do get this beautiful model of these sort of modern exception of the landscape of hell. You know, this big model like landscape. And when we see it like a monk sitting at it. And there's all these blue balls of light hanging on strings. And we can tell it's a model. That's what I meant by Ed Wood. But the way it's shot, the cinematography is so gorgeous. And it looks so great with this version. That, yeah, it looks like Ed Wood done by James Cameron or Christopher Nolan. And then it switches to like the red tint, and we see the model with the layers of hell, but there's like a functioning model because we see, you know, obviously there's some sort of puppeteers with sticks or strings pulling these like paper or cardboard depictions of sinners and flames and demons and the devil throughout the model. Very interesting looking. And then the next part shows pretty much what the Inquisition was like. We get these little vignettes that tells a bigger story of there's this household with a sick man. They're kind of housing this very elderly woman with like no teeth. The doctor comes and looks at him and says, you know, the only way he could fall sick to of dizziness is if he has been hexed by a witch. And so this one woman goes to, I'm guessing, the church, tells these monks that the elderly woman, you know, she's a witch, shows how they get captured, which is like this sort of makeshift cage on wheels. Throw a bag on her, stuff her in there. And then they try to get her to confess with various forms of torture. She tells her story about how she came across this household of witches. She gave birth to many odd-looking demon babies, which I think this is part. It's not German expressionist, but I think it kind of takes note from it. Because when it shows her giving birth to these demon things, obviously she's up on a chair with a dress. And it looks like either little people or children kind of crawling out from under her with what looks like obvious costumes to look like a demon. But it works. It doesn't look fake. It looks fake, but it doesn't look like old-timey cheap costumes that don't hold up. It fits the feel and sort of oddity of the film. And says how all the women, basically, these nuns, I guess, that she was at this house with the sick man. Oh, and then after she gave birth to those demon children, she was rubbed with witch oil. And then we get this very bizarre scene that I thought was, again, very interesting. It was like right after the elderly woman's being rubbed with the witch oil, where it goes to like the blue tint, and we see Satan, played by Benjamin Christensen, who has like this very dark, almost abrasive looking skin paint, big crazy ears, kind of a more human version of this sort of bumps that don't protrude the skin, and he keeps doing this thing with his tongue. Like, it looks like his tongue's almost like vibrating, but it's like constantly out. And very strange stuff. Like, I think it shows this other woman like laying there naked, and he has like these sort of long hands with these long fingers. Almost looks like a puppet, sort of grazing her skin. Eventually it shows, it's going to get jumbled up because I don't really remember the exact order, but there is a part where they even sacrifice like a baby, and it looks like a doll. It looks like a plastic dummy doll, but that was the scene that, putting myself in 1922, I was just like, oh my god. And I mean, it's not really exploiting witchcraft. It's not parodying or making light of or making a horror movie based on these interpretations and documents. It's showing what people thought back then. It's probably more educational than anything. And so, I don't quite remember where I was going with that. But yeah, we have all these dream sequences that are very interesting, very well shot, very creepy. It's a very eerie movie. I mean, you could certainly say it's a horror movie just based on, aside from being about witchcraft and the devil and sort of, not really possession, but, just the imagery alone. Which even in the, like, let her suffering begin. Yeah, this is the kind of artwork that we see during, like, the documentary portion. But eventually we see the monks get the rest of the other women. And then it shows how they were tortured. And it's done in a documentary style where, well, first, before it gets to that, the one woman that's left, it shows kind of how cruel they were to get these confessions. And it was like, I know you have a child, but, and the guards said, if you confess to me, I'll smuggle you out of here at night. You and your child can flee into the next village or whatever. And of course, the rest of the monks and the guards are outside listening, and he kind of gives them a signal to move away. Says, see, there's nobody out there. Show me this one little tiny trick that witches do just to show me that you're a witch. If you do that, I'll let you go. And just as she finally gives in to show him, they burst in. And it talks about some of the witch tests, which it doesn't come out and say this is why we have the expression, wild witch hunt or witch hunt today. Because literally anybody could have been a witch for the smallest of things back then. Everyone was guilty. It said, it says you couldn't be old and ugly, you couldn't be young and beautiful, because then you were a witch. They would do this thing where they would like tie you, they would bind you somehow, bring you out into the water where that's too deep. If you, if they tossed you over and then you started to float, you were a witch. If you sank, you weren't. And just like crazy tests like that they did, kind of like in Monty Python, weighing the same amount as a duck. And shows how, many women, men, and children were burned at the stake because they often beat and tortured and tricked them into confessing. Then we get into this nice documentary portion that really feels like a documentary. This all feels like a movie with good production value, good costumes. The acting, felt believable. It didn't feel like the expressionist over-the-topness, except for maybe, I think it was the judge character of the Inquisitors. But they showed some of the torture devices the way a documentary would. Like, it would kind of open up. It would present the torture device, like you would see actors' hands kind of show it. It would kind of fade out and present the next one. Sort of show how they opened and what they did. One was, it was these long iron pinchers, sort of like tongs, but one part had a fork, and then the other end was like that. And they would show a woman, being pinched like here. There was one that looked pretty painful. Tabletop with like a pyramid. You would set your hand on it like this so that the tabletop was like against your fingertips. Put like a brace so you couldn't move your hand, and then a hammer would hit you here. So it would hit down against that little pyramid, kind of bending your fingers that way. Or one where your legs were put sandwiched in these two boards by themselves, and then there was a wedge hammered in between them so each one would squeeze your legs. And then when it shows the thumb screw, which people might, if you've seen Blood-Sucking Freaks, it's also in that. It even says one of my actresses insisted on trying it herself during the shoot. And it shows this woman who we haven't seen before. She's not, or maybe we have. She's not in costume. She looks like a modern day young girl. And it shows her with the thumb screw on, and she's kind of talking. You kind of see her go, ow, ow, ow. So there, he addresses his actresses. And also at one point he says, my actress who portrays the elderly woman that had been tortured and been told to confess, he said she confided in me that she felt the presence of the devil, that he is real. So that's sort of what I meant about breaking its own fourth wall, where he does say that those sequences are dramatizations. It's not meant to look like a movie, or not meant to be a movie. These are all dramatizations, which kind of took me out of it a little bit. But I like that it did that. It felt different. It certainly helped the documentary feel of the film. But it was very brief, and they do continue on with dramatizations after that. So it didn't take me out of it too much. I was sort of in the mindset that, like, the beginning and the intertitles was like the documentary, and then these are, I guess, disconnected flashbacks to, like, that time. Like, these aren't actors playing these people, in the sense that it's a documentary doing dramatizations. Obviously, they're actors, not a portal to the 15th century. I hope that makes sense. I thought it was actually showing what the intertitles were saying. Because the intertitles do explain every scene and set up the next one. So I thought it was more of just showing us what the intertitles meant. I didn't know it was going to address them as actors and actresses and, playing these characters from the Inquisition segments. But even though it kind of took me out of it a little bit, I still appreciated it. I thought, well, that's a different angle. I haven't really seen it done like that before. And then towards the end, he talks about how nowadays we look at things as physical ailments or mental psychological disorders that would have been enough to call someone a witch back then. And it shows these elderly women, because it does talk about how most elderly women were tried as a witch, and it showed a couple of these with certain appearances that would make them stand out. Or it said these sort of nursing home type places, they would look for ones that would make one stand out. Like it showed a woman with a hunchback, one that sort of, not convulsions, but kind of had the shakes. A woman with one eye. Those were all standout things that would make people think that they were a witch back then. Then we get more dramatizations of sort of the possession, like being possessed by the devil. It does go into that. Like he talks about how he once personally knew a woman, and it shows, we get that dramatization, who had a fear of fire, but she had an obsession with lighting matches in bed. While she was asleep, she would sleepwalk. It even calls him a somnambulist, which always makes me think of, which is the technical term for sleepwalker, but it always makes me think of Dr. Caligari when I hear that word. And just how the devil can take hold, and we do see the devil again, played by Christensen, and we sort of see this one nun sort of be beckoned by the devil, goes to the church with a knife, stabs one of the Jesus crackers. The rest of the nuns sort of go crazy. And it pretty much ends with them talking about, do we still have it today? It's changed this much over time. And just how we better understand more oddities like sleepwalking or schizophrenia and delusions. Because, it also shows how some women confessed to crazier things, like turning into cats. Transformed into cats, then walking into the altar, while the more demon guards watch the door so they can sort of urinate on the altar. And we get a blue-tinted bit of that, where it literally looks like them in fur coats with these crazy big cat heads, while the guards have more convincing, like full body, kind of like unitards with like a pig head. Very eerie looking, still look creepy. And even though the costume is like a fur coat, like a cat head, that are still people-sized, it fit the tone, it fit the eeriness, sort of the I don't really know if this counts as expressionism, but it really fit the visual strangeness and appeal and intrigue of the film. It didn't look fake and poor. It looked actually pretty interesting and eerie. And then how some confessions, because they were tortured so much, they would just confess to tying knots under a, a wedding bed. Each knot in a rope stood for a failed pregnancy. And then, witch's hair and metal crosses thrown under the bed could ruin the happiness in the entire household. And then we get a dramatization of that. We get more of like the demon, Satan sort of dreamlike scapes with the naked woman laying there. We do get a shot of a butt, so I guess that's a nudity for 1922. Sort of laying there in front of what looked almost like a feast, with that long, skinny, almost like Jack Skellington arm, with the big black Nosferatu fingers kind of going like up and down her side. More shots of like the devil, played by Christensen. And yeah, how we understand sleepwalking, kleptomania, schizophrenia, delusions. And yeah, just pretty much where it kind of ends with how far we've come with thinking it was satanic and witchcraft to certain behaviors and appearances. Now we attribute it to more psychological and medical scientific explanations. But it is very interesting and very striking to watch. Again, the Criterion Blu-ray, it looks gorgeous. It does not look like a gritty, grainy 1920 silent film, which if it did, I would still love it to death because I love that look. But this is like the most crisp and clear, high resolution. I'm not sure when this came out last year, so it looks great. But it does a good job with taking this very historical text and context, telling it like it is, like a documentary, but also doing a good job with its dramatizations and feeling like an actual silent film at times. Definitely with its more surreal, this word I was looking for earlier, surreal pieces and vignettes with like the dreamscapes, the nightmares, the appearances of the devil, the stop motion, the models used for the escape of the levels of hell. Just very well made, well done, very interesting and gorgeous to look at sort of documentary silent film. And I'd never seen I guess a documentary. Essentially that is what it is. I mean, all the information in it and everything that's said is of historical value and is as accurate as, the text and research that he conducted. But this is going on for over a half hour. I definitely recommend this. Yeah, I did know, I thought it was like the first half was going to be more like the documentary with like the pictures, like the little pointer pointing to stuff, intertitles explaining what that was, and then it was going to be a movie. That's what I thought, but I am more than happy with how this movie came out. I enjoyed it so much. It's one of my favorite silent films now. It's up there with Nosferatu, Caligari. I don't know about Man Who Laughs, because again, that's not really a horror film. But again, this is a league, in a total different league of its own. It's sort of beyond German Expressionists. It feels like. It's like its own totally different category, but I loved it to death. Very awesome, well-made, interesting movie. I can see why Criterion wanted to do something with it. Highly recommend it. Definitely, even if you're not a fan of silent films, just treat it like a silent documentary, I guess. But if you are going to get it, don't watch it on YouTube, which I do believe it has. It is fully worth whatever price you see it for. I got it for $20. The new Criterion Blu-ray. You won't regret it. I loved this movie. I thought it was awesome. Häxan, or Häxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages by Benjamin Christensen. One of my favorite films of the 1920s now. It was awesome. Thank you for watching.